Hi class, today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at Chapter 4, Comprehensive Problem 2B. Okay, you should be able to see Schedule E, and we're going to start with Schedule E first because it feeds into Schedule 1, which would also feed into the 1040 form. So we're going to need to complete Schedule E first. So I'm going to start with this first. And what you're going to need to do is record the name of the person that's going to be on the return, and that's going to come from your instructions. Your instructions, you should be able to see on your screen here, are for Patricia or Patty Pate, who is retired from Palm Springs Culinary Arts Academy. She is a single taxpayer and is 62 years old. Patty lives at 98 Callender Street, apartment 206D, Henderson, Nevada, 89052 is her zip code. Professor Pate's Social Security number is this, and in 2019, she had a few months of salary from her previous job. Patty also rents a rental condo located at 392 Spatula Way, Mount Charleston, Nevada. The condo rented for 2 months in 2019 for $850 a month. So that's important to know. This is how much income she's got for 2 months. And this is going to go on the Schedule E, which is the supplemental income and loss schedule. They also discovered that there was a mold problem in her condo, and her renters moved out. She was unable to rent the apartment after the repairs, although she vigorously pursued new tenants. Patty actively manages the property herself. The following are the related expenses to the rental house. So we're going to have to record the expenses to the rental house on this Schedule E. So we'll start with Schedule E first by filling in the information for Patty Pate. All right, so I'm going to go back to my Schedule E for just a second. And we're going to fill in her name here. And we're going to also put our Social Security number, which was given in your instructions. You also want to put in the physical address that was given in the instructions. Right here is where it says in A, Part 1, did you make any payments in 2020 that would require you to file Form 1099? And the answer to that is no. So we're going to click no here. They didn't give you any information about that, so that's why we selected that. Then you enter in the address of the rental, and then we're going to go on to the type of property, and it comes from down below here, and this is a single family residence, so we're going to put a 1 here. They rented it for 365 days for the year, and then we're going to move on to the more important part of this, which tells you how much rents were received. You'll remember that they received $850 a month for only 2 months. So if you multiply 850 times 2, it's going to give you $1,700 in rents that you would have received. Oops, excuse me, I'm on the wrong line there. 1,700 would go right here under line 3, rents received. And then we're going to list our expenses that were given to us in the problem. We had some advertising expense. We had some insurance expense. And I'm taking these straight off the problem. We had some mortgage expense. And we had some taxes. And before we get to that, we had some line 14, which is repairs. So we're going to put 1,195 here for the repairs on line 14. And then we're going to move on to line 16, which was our taxes. And then we had some other expenses that were not listed up in here. So we're going to list them down here. And there was homeowners dues. And there was some gardening. And the homeowners dues was $1,260 and the gardening was $560. You combine the two of those together and that will give you $1,820. So there are 2 types of dues. And again, you get these from your instructions in your problem. So go back to the instructions if you want to look to see where that was. Here was the gardening of $560, and we added to that the $1,260 of the homeowners association fees. And that's how I got the $1,820. Then what you're going to do is you're going to total up your expenses. So if you combine all of the expenses together here, which is lines 5 through 19, add lines 5 through 19, and that will give you 17,776 as the total expenses. And your total expenses would be subtracted from the rents that you received. And so we're going to enter on line 21 a negative amount here because there was a loss. We had more expenses than what we brought in. of $16,076. And then we're going to move to line 22. And here it tells you need to fill out form 8582. And this negative amount is $16,076. And so I just brought that down here. In form 8582, let me see if we had to fill out one of those. We did. Let's see if I can find it somewhere else. I believe that's form 8582. Yeah, it is. And obviously it's not showing. So I'm going to try to click on a PDF of that. This is form 8582. And so this would also be filled out. And in this case, we of course will put the owner's name here. And we would bring that loss that we found from Schedule A over to line 1B. Should say activities with the net loss. And the amount would go here as $16,076. That amount would then flow through to line 1D. And this is a negative amount here. So it needs to go in parentheses. And this would flow on down to this bottom line. So obviously you didn't have anything that you had to fill in here. So that's why this went on line 4. And then with line 4, it says if line 4 is a loss, and line D1 is a loss, which it was, you're going to go to part 2. So we need to move to part 2 to fill out the next part of this form. And this is part 2. And then on line 5, you're going to enter the smaller the loss on line 1D or the loss on line 4. The loss on line 1D was line 4. So in other words, we're going to put in the loss here of $16,076. And then we don't do anything. Oh, excuse me. We do something on line 6. It says to enter $150,000 here. But if you're married filing separately, you can't enter that $150. You have to go to the instructions to see how much you could enter in there. All right, and then in line 7 says enter the modified adjusted gross income. But not less than 0. And to figure this, you really need to have started your 1040 form. You need to know that you had some wages of 9,800. And you also need to know that in the rest of this problem that there was a gain on the sale of a personal residence as the home of $10,000. So this would come from your 1040 form. And since we haven't filled it out to this point yet, we really can't put this in at this point in time. So before we can do this, we need to show that we had a gain on the sale of our home. So technically we don't have the information for this right here at this point in time. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go back to my 2019 1040 form, and I'm going to enter some information that we do know about 1040, the 1040 form. And this is where you would fill out all the information for that was given in the problem. I don't want to take time to do all of that, but you know, all this comes from the problem. There were no dependents for this particular person. And so none of that would be filled in. So all you'd fill in is the name of the owner, the social security number, the home address. And then we would go to line 1 for our wages, and we need to pick up line 1, and that comes from your instructions. She had wages of 9,800. So we'd enter 9,800 on line 1 here in the 1040. And going back to the instructions again, she had some federal tax withheld. You could put that on 1040 if you wanted to. So going back to the 1040 form, and that amount would go all the way on the second page for the federal income tax withheld, which is line 17, was $450. So we'll scroll back up here. We didn't have any taxable interest on this particular problem, or any ordinary dividends. Nothing about IRA was talked about. But we do have a capital gain or loss, which it tells you have to attach Schedule D. So we need to go to Schedule D to show the sale of that home. So I'm going to go to Schedule D now. I know I'm jumping around, but that's about what you have to do if you're filling them out by hand. And you fill in the name, of course, and the social security number. And on Schedule D, you have to complete 8949 really before you can do Schedule D, because it has information on it that's needed on line 10 of this Schedule D. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be showing the sale of our home in this box right here for the sales price of the home. So you can see here, we have to know what's on schedule 8949 before we can do that. So there's a particular order you have to go through before you can fill out all of your forms. So let me go back to schedule 8949. Let me see if I can find that. And here's our schedule 8949. Again, you'd fill in the name of the person and Social Security. For time purposes, I'm not going to do that. We would need to look at part 1 to see what we need to check in this particular box. What we've done is we've sold a personal residence, and it was not reported on Form 1099B. So we're going to click on Part C here because they didn't give it to us in Form 1099B. They just told us that we sold a residence. I'm skipping back to the instructions for just a minute. This is where she sold her home, and there's nothing reported about 1099B. So there was no 1099 form. We would have to click that on the Form 8949 and show that as a checked box. So let me see if I can get back to the right form. We showed that in C. And then for a description of the property, we would list that we wouldn't put anything here because we're not doing selling of stocks or anything like that. So you're going to scroll on down to part 2. This will be considered a long-term transaction when you sell a residence. If you've owned the residence for more than a year, it's going to be considered long-term. And so we would put in as a description in part 2, the type of problem or the type of property that we had. And so in part 2, you have to read your instructions again. These are long-term transactions not reported to you on 1099B. And so you have to check one of those boxes, and then we could put in this form a description of the property. And the description of the property would be it's the sale of a personal residence. That's what I would put there. So I'm going back to my Form 8949. And I'm in part 2, and I'm going to just put primary residence here because that's what it was, or you could say it's a personal home. But the tax rules probably like for you to say that it's a residence. And it's a primary residence because that's where they have lived. And they acquired this on 7/15. of 89, and it was sold on 2/27 of 19. And the amount they sold it for was $380,000. This comes directly off of your instructions, and it cost you $120,000. Again, if you look back at your instructions, they sold it for this, and her basis or the cost of her home was $120,000. So I'm going back to Form 8949. And then we're going to look at column H, where it says subtract from column E, from column D. So we subtract these to find the amount of the gain. And the amount of the gain would have been 380,000 less 120,000 is 260,000. But 250,000 of that is excludable for purposes of income, or the amount of your adjustment would be 250,000. And this is on the sale of a personal residence. If you're single, you can exclude 250,000 of the gain. So the total gain was 120,000 would be subtracted from 380,000. The total gain was 260,000. We could exclude 250,000 of that. And so the gain that's taxable is 10,000. This was the only sale of personal residence. It was the only long-term type of capital gain. And so we just move to the bottom and fill in the blanks at the bottom, which are just adding up the columns of information that you have here. So 380,000 would go here. 120,000 would go here. And we can exclude 250,000. And then what we have left is a $10,000 gain. And if you read the instructions here, you're going to take this to Schedule D, line 10. So we're going to go to Schedule D, line 10, because we chose box F. There was no 1099 form that came with this. So we're going to use, go to Schedule D, line 10, and fill this $10,000 amount in. So I'm going to go to Schedule D, line 10. And on Schedule D, line 10, we would put the proceeds again, which was the amount that we sold the personal residence for. And the amount that we sold it for was $380,000. It cost us $120,000. We subtracted to find the amount of the gain, but we could exclude 250,000 of that. And so we were left with 10,000 as the amount of the gain. And then we would feed that to right here, line 15. And then that would go on to the next page of this, where it says combine lines 7 and 15 together. There was nothing on 7. So we just had 15 here. So line 16, we're going to enter 10,000. And then we have to read our instructions. If line 16 is a gain, which it is, we're going to enter the amount from line 16 on 1040 form. And we're going to enter that on line 6. So we have to complete this Schedule D before we can enter it on form 1040. But before we can complete Schedule D, we had to complete form 8949. So 8949 goes first, then we can put this in Schedule D, and then this amount here goes on the 1040 form. And it goes in line 6. So 1040 line 6, we're going to put in the $10,000 amount here. And we're going to go on to line 7 to see if we have anything that comes from line 7. And line 7 says it's other income, Schedule 1, line 9. And so if we go to Schedule 1, line 9, see if I can find it. I don't see that I have a Schedule 1 pulled up for you, so you'd have to go back and pull up Schedule 1 from the link that they have available in Blackboard. So just bear with me. I've got so many things pulled up, I'm afraid it's going to mess things up. But anyway, we can't enter anything on 7A until we know what happened on Schedule 1. And Schedule 1, I'll go back and see if I can pull this up. So hang on. Schedule 1. You definitely need a Schedule 1. Well, I'm gonna have to put a Schedule 1 on there because I don't see that it's listed in here. So that throws a bummer in that one. You need a Schedule 1 for that. So I don't think I got it. Okay, let me see if I can search for it. Just a second. Schedule 1. 1040. 2019. Let's see if we got one for 2020. Okay, yeah, this is what it should look like, Schedule 1. So I put that link in there for you. I didn't realize it wasn't in there for Schedule 1. And what we're going to have to do is we're going to look at Part 1 and we're going to go to line 5. This is where the rental real estate was going. You see here where it says to attach Schedule E. So technically I need Schedule E. So let me go back and see if I can find Schedule E. And here's the Schedule E that we were working on previously. And we had gotten down to line 22. So we're going to move on to 23A, which says the total amount reported on line 3 of all rental properties. Line 3 was 1,700. So 23A is 1,700. 23B didn't apply to us. 23C, total amounts reported on line 12 for all properties, and that was 9,100. So that comes from line 12 here. I just put it down here again. And then total of amounts reported on line 18. We didn't have anything on line 18. Total of amounts reported on line 20. On line 20, we did have our total expenses there. So we're going to put total expenses there in 23E. And then we're going to move to line 24. And 24 says all add positive amounts shown on line 21. We didn't have a positive amount, we had a negative amount. So we have to go straight to line 25. And we're going to enter 16,076 here as a loss. And then on line 26, we're going to combine lines 24 and 25. So again, it's a loss here. And then it says, enter the result here. If parts 2, 3, and 4 and line 40 on page 2 do not apply to you, also enter this amount on Schedule 1. So in line 2, we didn't have anything that we knew about from a partnership or corporation, or in part 2. Part 3, none of the rest of this is filled out. So this amount right here is going to go straight into Schedule 1, line 5. So I'm going to pick up Schedule 1, line 5. which is somewhere, it's not this one, Schedule 1. Having some trouble finding it, so just bear with me. There it is. And then on line 5, this is where we're going to record the 16,076 as a loss. And that 16,076 as a loss will also feed down here on line 9. And this amount is going to feed back into your 1040 form. So line 7A was actually a loss of 16,076. And again, this loss comes right off of Schedule E. It goes to Schedule E to Schedule 1, and from Schedule 1 to the 1040 form. All right, now on Schedule 10, on Form 1040, line 7B, we're just going to combine the amounts that we have here. So 9,800 plus 10,000 minus 16,076 gives you 3,724. And then we did not do any adjustments on line 8A, and line 8B is subtract 8A from 7B. So we just have 3724 listed again. And this is the adjusted gross income. And so that adjusted gross income goes here. Now, for the standard deduction, we need to know that this person was single and her deduction was 12,200. So on line 9, we put 12,200. On 11A, we didn't have a qualified business income for 10. So on 11A, we just record 12,200 again. And then we're going to move to 11B, which is our taxable income. And so what we're going to do is we're going to combine 8B with 11A. We've got to subtract 11A from 8B. And what that'll leave you with is a negative amount of 8,476, which is your taxable income. This is your taxable income, 8,476. And then you're going to look up the tax from your instructions. and the amount of the tax comes back to 0. So on 12B, we're going to put a 0 down here because this is a negative amount, means we don't owe any tax. And so we had 450 that was withheld from our gross earnings. So we're going to get a refund basically of 450. That's what they're trying to tell you there. But technically, you should follow the rest of this. They didn't have any child, they didn't have a child to take the child tax for dependent. And there was nothing in 13B that would be entered. And then you've got to subtract line 13B from 12B, which is 0. You can enter that on line 14. And then basically that follows through to line 16. Is 0 there. This is 450. And we didn't have any of these that applied to us. So this would have been 0 here. And then we're going to add lines 17 and 18E together, which means that this is going to be 450 again. And then if line 19 is more than line 16, which it is, this is the amount you overpaid. So you're going to get a refund, and that refund is $450. And that's the amount that you would want refunded to you. So that's your 1040 form that would be completed. And so we've got Schedule 1 in review. Make sure I got everything completed because I think there's something that we left off. Schedule 1 was way over here. Okay, we got Schedule 1 completed. So that was correct. And then we need to go to Schedule D to see if we finished it. This was the residence, and we completed Schedule D. So we also needed to look to see if 8949 was completed. And I'm looking at form 8949. And the only thing that we had showing was the primary residence. And that totaled everything off for that form. So that's been completed. And then we did a supplemental income and loss, which is Schedule E. Which we finished Schedule E. And then we had form 8582. And this was the one that was weird. When I pulled it up, this is what I got. So I had to open it up in another screen. And so we had gotten down to line 7. Here's where it was that we needed to finish this. You want to enter on line 7, you want to enter the modified adjusted gross income. And to find what that is, we need to look at the form 1040 form. So I'm going to scroll back to the 1040 form. and it's not on the 1040 form. The modified adjusted gross income, you just have to figure, and that came from the wages plus the amount of the gain on Schedule D. If you add the two of those together, it gives you 19,800. So going back to form 8525, this line right here is 19,800. Let me tell you how I'm getting this again. There were wages of 9,800 that was given. And then we had a gain on the sale of the home of 10,000. If you add 9,800 plus 10,000, it'll give you that 19,800 that we have there. And then in line 8, we're going to subtract this from this, and that's going to leave us with 130,200. And then in line 9, we're going to multiply line 8 by 50%. And you're not to enter more than 25,000. Well, if you multiplied this by 50%, it would give you 60,100. So we're going to have to put in the 25 amount that we're limited to here, 25,000. And then on line 10, it says enter the smaller of line 5 or 9. The smaller is line 5. So we're going to put 16,076 here. And that goes on line 10. And it also tells us on line 10, if line 2C is a loss, go to part 3, or otherwise go to line 15. So we need to go to line 15. There's no income because it was a loss. And so line 16, we need to put in the amount of the loss, which was from that rental income of 16,076. And that would complete the form 8582. And so that form is complete now. So I'm going to go back to my other forms. There's one other form that you would need to complete, which is called the net operating loss, or is form 1045. Let me see if I can find that form. This is your 1045 form. And in your instructions, they tell you to fill out Schedule A to see if there's a net operating loss for this company. And so you have to fill out this schedule before you can know what to put on the top part of this form. So go straight to Schedule A, and we're going to complete line number 1. And line number 1 is your adjusted gross income that comes from the form 1040 less your standard deduction. So you're going to have to figure an amount that goes here, and that amount is 8,476. And this amount right here comes from your adjusted gross income, which is on the 1040 form. Your adjusted gross income was 3724. And then you're going to subtract out the 12,200 in standard deductions, and that will leave you with 8476, which is what you enter on this particular form. So let me get back to the 1045 form. And that's where I got this amount here. It's the 3725 adjusted gross income less the standard deduction, which leaves you with 8476, which also is your taxable income from 1040 form for this problem. But actually they wanted you to subtract your standard deduction from your adjusted gross income. So your adjusted gross income was 3725. That came from 1040 form. And then you're going to subtract the standard deduction of 12,200 because this person was single, and that will leave you with a negative 8476. We didn't have any non-business capital losses in this problem. So we're going to go on to non-business capital gains. We sold our residence for a gain of $10,000. So the primary residence was sold for a gain of $10,000. You need to enter $10,000 on line 3. On line 4, it says if line 2 is more than line 3, which it is not, you enter a 0 here. And then we'll move to line 5. If line 3 is more than line 2, enter the difference, which is 10,000. It goes here. And then on line 6, we've got non-business deductions. And line 6, the non-business deduction that we have is 12,200, and that was the standard deduction. So we can only take the standard deduction as a non-business deduction in this particular problem. Then you'll move on to line 7, which is non-business income other than the capital gains. And we didn't have any of that. That would be things like taxable interest income that could have possibly gone there, but we didn't have any. So we're going to put 0 there. And then line 8 says to add lines 5 and 7 together. These two go together, and that gives us 10,000 again. And then we'll move on to line 9, which is if line 6 is more than line 8, and it is, enter the difference. So we subtract this from this, and it gives us 2,200. And then on line 10, it says if line 8 is more than line 6, which it is not, you're going to enter a 0. So on line 10, we got 0 entered here. And then on line 11, they asked for business capital losses before the limitation. We didn't have any business capital losses that would go there. Line 12 says business capital gains. We didn't have any of those. So line 13 was 10 and 12, which would be 0. And then you subtract line 13 from line 11, it's still going to give you 0. And then add lines 4 and 14 together. 4 was 0, 14 is 0, so line 15 has to be 0. And line 16 says that we need to enter a loss, if any, from line 16 of your 2020 Schedule D form. And we didn't have anything to put there. So we're going to leave that blank. And then 17 is blank too. And then this is another subtract 17 from 16, which has to be 0. And you just keep moving through the forms, answer what's there. Line 20 is going to be 0. Line 21 is 0. Line 22 is 0. So just answer the questions that they're asking you. And then, so on line 25, or line 24, line 25, for the 2020 form is just a little bit different, but anyway, this becomes a negative amount that would go on this line here. And I believe that if you pull it off of what we've got printed on for 2019, I believe that you would have a line 25 here that would say this 6,276. But anyway, we're combining lines 1, 9, 17, and 21. So 1, 9 combined together is how they get this amount here. And this is the net operating loss. And what I want to say to you about the net operating loss is that net operating loss can be carried forward into the new year, but we don't enter it in this year anywhere on the 1040 form. So a lot of you had questions about this form here, the net operating loss form. And if you followed Schedule A instructions, I think you can follow this. And this is what you would have entered as your last line here. But this, I want you to realize, is a loss that's going forward. It would be on the 1040 form next year when they filed it. And it would go on Schedule 1, line 8. And it would go in as a negative number, but that would be next year, not this year's. It's a carry forward loss, in other words. The net operating loss, they allow you to carry it forward into a new year. So this would not affect the 1040 for this problem. So that's all I want to talk to you about today. I'm going to stop sharing this with you. I know there was a lot of information here, but just I ask that you try to do it the best that you can. So we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.